You think you're awakening, but you're not. You're in a spiritual emergency. Jung warned us. The reason most people never survive this journey isn't weakness. It's the wrong map. The panic, the isolation, the feeling like you're losing your mind while everyone else drifts through life untouched. That's not awakening gone wrong. That is awakening. Jung called it the night sea journey. A descent so dark, so devastating, it strips away every illusion you've ever clung to. Most run back to sleep. Others collapse completely. Some wear a mask, faking enlightenment while secretly drowning. But Jung didn't just study this, he lived it. And what he found in that abyss might be the only thing that saves you.
Most people imagine awakening as light, as peace, as transcendence. But Jung saw something far more dangerous. A systematic destruction of everything you thought was true. It doesn't lift you up gently into bliss. It drags you down, into a darkness so complete you no longer recognize yourself. He called it the night sea journey. A plunge into the depths of the psyche, where illusions dissolve one by one until nothing familiar remains. And in that darkness, three fates wait for most seekers: to run back to sleep, to collapse into dysfunction, or to fake it, wearing a spiritual mask even more false than the persona they tried to escape. Jung knew this not as theory but as lived reality. At the height of his career, respected, successful, surrounded by colleagues and acclaim, he deliberately walked into the abyss. For 6 years he endured visions so violent, voices so relentless, images so catastrophic that he feared madness itself had claimed him. He wrote, "I was menaced by a psychosis, floods of blood across Europe, the dead walking, conversations with figures no one else could see. His family thought he was lost, his peers abandoned him, he nearly shattered completely." But it was in that very descent, in the terror, the disorientation, the breaking of every illusion, that Jung found something extraordinary, a map for survival. Not survival of your spiritual life, but survival of your actual psyche. Because awakening isn't the bliss the gurus sell you. It isn't ascension. It isn't transcendence. It is the destruction of the lies you've used to stay sane. We like to imagine our illusions as flaws. Jung knew they were not flaws at all, but survival mechanisms. Every persona you wear, every projection you cast, every unconscious routine you cling to, these are not weaknesses. They are the fragile scaffolding that has held your life together. And awakening? Awakening tears it all away. Not gently, not with comfort, but with a brutality that can make you lose contact with reality itself. Your psyche doesn't want you to wake up. It wants you to survive. And when you come too close to truth, it will fight back with weapons you don't even know you're carrying. This is why so many don't make it, not because they lack strength, but because they don't understand what's really happening. They mistake destruction for failure, collapse for weakness, panic for madness. But Jung saw it differently. These were not signs of failure. They were the very proof that awakening had begun. Imagine this: your entire identity, every mask you've worn, every belief you've clung to, every story you've told yourself just to keep moving, dismantled, piece by piece. At first you resist, trying to hold the fragments together, but the more you cling, the faster they slip through your grasp. This is the descent, not a mistake, not a detour, but the very path itself. Jung's warning is simple but devastating. If you step onto this path, you will not remain who you were. You cannot. The you that seeks awakening is the very thing awakening must destroy. And so the question is not, can I survive this? The question is, am I willing to be destroyed so something truer can emerge? This is the beginning. The night sea journey. A place where light has no meaning, where sanity feels like it is slipping away, and where most turn back. But for those who remain, for those who surrender to the descent rather than resist it, something waits in the depths. Not bliss, not comfort, but the first glimpse of a truth so raw it can break or remake you. And that is where the real awakening begins. The first trap of awakening is the one almost no one sees coming. It arrives disguised as progress. You meditate more, you pray more, you chase light and transcendence, and you believe you are advancing. But Jung saw the truth. The more light you claim, the darker your shadow grows. Not metaphorically, literally, psychologically, measurably. What feels like evolution may in fact be the beginning of your destruction. All your life, you've buried parts of yourself. Your rage, your selfishness, your jealousy, your hunger for power, even your deepest joy, pushed into the shadow because they felt too dangerous, too shameful, too raw to show. You built a persona, convincing enough to believe it was you. But the shadow never disappears. It waits. And when awakening begins, it does not dissolve. It erupts. This eruption terrifies most seekers. A healer who preaches unconditional love suddenly dreams of torturing her clients. A monk who meditates 16 hours a day begins to fantasize about killing his brothers. A teacher of peace wakes up consumed by uncontrollable rage. They think they are becoming evil. Jung told them the truth that shattered their illusions. You're not becoming evil. You're becoming whole, and wholeness includes everything you've rejected. But here is the danger. Most people can't bear it. They double down on their practices, trying to pray away their shadow, to meditate it into silence, to ascend above it. And what happens? Collapse. Jung documented it again and again. People who seemed most advanced, who radiated light and spiritual purity, were often those standing closest to disaster, because what they thought was awakening was nothing more than inflation. Light without shadow, purity without depth, transcendence without truth. And inflation, Jung warned, always ends in explosion. The shadow is not your enemy. Jung called it the seat of creativity, the vault where every ounce of your rejected power and authenticity has been hidden. That anger you feel rising inside, it's not evil. It's decades of suppressed life force clawing its way back to the surface. That destructive urge, that's your power trying to come home. The shadow doesn't seek to destroy you. It seeks to complete you. But to survive its eruption, you cannot fight it. You must face it. Jung himself was haunted by violent fantasies, images of blood and destruction so vivid they threatened to consume him. He did not run. He painted them. He wrote them. He spoke to them. He entered into what he called active imagination, giving the shadow a voice, a face, a story. And in those conversations with his own darkness, he found not evil, but an ancient guide he named Philemon, a figure of deep wisdom buried within his unconscious. Through the shadow's doorway, he discovered the wellspring of creativity and vision that defined his life's work. This is the choice. Resist the shadow, and it will possess you, acting out through your addictions, your relationships, your unconscious behavior, until it destroys everything you've built. But engage it consciously, and it becomes your ally. It becomes the devil you dance with, the fire you learn to carry without being burned. Jung's words echo like a warning. I would rather be whole than good. Yet the spiritual world often teaches the opposite. It tells you to love and light your way past the shadow, to vibrate higher, to transcend. But that isn't transcendence, it's bypassing. And bypassing breeds the most dangerous outcome of all, the spiritual criminal. Someone who hides their darkness so completely that it leaks out in secret, destroying lives from the shadows they refuse to face. Think of the teachers caught in scandal, the leaders who preached purity only to fall into corruption. They didn't fail because they weren't spiritual. They failed because they never integrated the very darkness their light tried to deny. So when the eruption comes, when rage, lust, chaos, or destruction flood your dreams and rise through your veins, the question is not, how do I banish this? The question is, what truth have I been too weak to hold? If you can bear that answer, if you can face the shadow without turning away, then the eruption becomes initiation. It becomes doorway instead of death sentence. But even if you survive this descent, there is something darker still waiting. For when the shadow is faced, another enemy rises, not outside of you but within, the ego itself. And the ego does not die quietly. It fights back. And it fights dirty. If the shadow erupts like a storm, the ego attacks like a trickster. It doesn't confront you head-on. It infiltrates. It takes your most sacred experiences, your moments of true spiritual contact, and quietly whispers, "This is mine. I did this. I am special." Jung saw it happen again and again. Patients touched the numinous, real visions, real synchronicities, real openings into the collective unconscious. And then their ego hijacked it. I received the message. I am awakened. I am chosen. The content was authentic, but the ownership was false, and in that fusion, a new danger was born. Spiritual inflation. The ego doesn't die during awakening. It evolves. It becomes more sophisticated, more deceptive, more dangerous. It cloaks itself in light, in holiness, in authority. It convinces you that you're not just experiencing the divine, you are the divine, that your visions make you superior, that your synchronicities prove you're chosen, and soon, you're no longer just unconscious. You're unconscious while believing you're awake. Jung warned, this is more dangerous than staying asleep. He told the story of a man, brilliant and successful, who began experiencing uncanny synchronicities, thoughts manifesting instantly, events aligning perfectly. He believed he had unlocked the very code of reality. Within months, he left his family, abandoned his work, and declared himself a prophet chosen to guide humanity. A year later, he was living on the streets, convinced the world was a simulation only he could see through. His ego had seized genuine spiritual fire and transformed it into madness. This is the dirty fight of the ego. When it realizes it is not the master, that it is merely middle management in the vast company of the psyche, it panics. But it's clever. It won't admit fear. Instead, it steals your awakening and turns it into a crown. And the moment you put that crown on your head, the collapse has already begun. Jung named the warning signs. They are subtle but devastating. Certainty without question, a sense of superiority over others, an intolerance for criticism, seeing signs and messages everywhere that confirm your specialness, believing your thoughts alone create reality, feeling called to save humanity. Each one seems like spiritual growth, but together they form the pattern of spiritual inflation. And inflation, like a balloon stretched too thin, always bursts. So how do you survive this trickster? Not by killing the ego, as so many teachings insist. Jung was clear, the ego is not your enemy. It is your container, your vessel, your anchor to reality. Without it, you don't transcend, you dissolve. You don't become enlightened, you become unable to function. The ego must remain, but in its proper place. Servant, not master. Vessel, not source. Radio, not the signal. This is why Jung taught the practice of relativizing the ego, to constantly question it, to put it back in proportion when it swells. When you feel special, ask, what archetypal energy am I identifying with? When you feel chosen, ask, chosen by which part of my psyche? When you feel awake, ask, what in me is still asleep? In this way, the ego isn't destroyed, it's humbled, balanced, kept in service rather than seizing the throne. But even when you succeed, even when you face your shadow and humble your ego, the awakening doesn't end. Something even harder comes next. For now, you must return to ordinary life, to family, to friends, to the world that has no idea what you've endured. And this return, Jung warned, is where most awakenings finally break. You've faced the shadow, you've humbled the ego, you think you've made it through. But Jung warned, the greatest test of awakening isn't in the depths, it's in the returning to ordinary life. Returning to people who never left the dream you shattered. And it is here, not in the darkness of the abyss, but in the brightness of everyday life, that most awakenings are destroyed. In every myth, the hero descends, finds the treasure, and returns to share it. But Jung noticed what the myths often leave out. When the hero comes home, the tribe does not celebrate. They attack, not with weapons but with doubt, with guilt, with subtle sabotage. Because your awakening is a mirror. Your authenticity exposes their masks. Your freedom threatens their comfort. Your truth reflects their illusions. Porcelain, and so they try, unconsciously, to pull you back into sleep. Not out of malice, but out of fear. Jung documented it over and over. Patients who had gone through profound individuation returned to families who systematically dismantled every gain. A woman, once a successful attorney, integrated her shadow, discovered her authentic self, and began to live with clarity. When she came back to her family, war broke out, not openly but in whispers. Her husband grew anxious about her changes. Her children became demanding and clingy. Her parents questioned her sanity. Every dinner turned into a battlefield of projections. Remember when you used to be fun? Are you sure you're okay? You seem different. Look who thinks she's enlightened now. One by one, her loved ones tried to pull her back into who she had been, because who she was becoming threatened the structure of their world. This is the trap of the return. Stay true to your awakening, and you risk isolation. Abandon it, and you lose yourself. Most cannot hold that tension. They either withdraw completely, becoming spiritual refugees cut off from society, or they surrender their awakening, returning to comfort, belonging, and the safety of sleep. Both choices fracture the soul. Why does it hurt so much? Because awakening doesn't just change you, it changes your frequency. You are no longer vibrating in harmony with the unconscious fusion that binds families, friends, and communities together. Jung called this the participation mystique, the invisible glue of shared illusions. When you break free, they experience it as betrayal, even as death. And in a way, they are right. The you who belonged to that unconscious fusion is dead. They are mourning your loss, even as they fight the new self that has been born. This is why returning to ordinary conversation after awakening can feel unbearable, like nails on a chalkboard inside your skull. Every false smile, every surface-level exchange, every unconscious projection grates against the truth you can no longer unsee. Jung himself described attending social gatherings where the shadows of everyone in the room danced before his eyes. The host's rage hidden under politeness, the wife's seduction disguised as charm, the guest projecting his mother onto the hostess. A psychological puppet show, invisible to them, blindingly obvious to him. And he knew, to speak these truths would shatter the fragile fabric of social life. To remain silent was to betray his sight. The tension was agony. So what do the survivors do? They don't disappear entirely, nor do they surrender their vision. Jung called it selective participation. Exposure in doses, short immersions into the sleeping world, followed by retreat into sacred space. His tower at Bollingen wasn't escape, it was survival, a sanctuary where he could live without compromise, where consciousness could breathe. Without such spaces, the awakened collapse into hermitage, into addiction, into despair, or into the false safety of a spiritual persona. The true survivors learn something far more difficult. They learn to hold the tension of opposites, to be fully awake in a sleeping world, to embody consciousness without superiority, to see everything without judgment, to bridge worlds without being torn apart by them. They become translators between dimensions of the psyche. Not preachers, not prophets, but living vessels of integration, carrying the treasure of awakening without forcing it, embodying truth without demanding others accept it. And yet, even here the journey is not finished, because awakening is not a single ordeal. It is not a descent followed by return. It is a cycle of endless deaths and endless rebirths. And for those who endure, another revelation awaits. That awakening is not an event, but a way of living. A life of constant dying, constant beginning, constant surrender. And it is this truth that breaks or remakes even the strongest souls. Most people imagine awakening as a finish line, a point of arrival, a moment when suffering ends and peace begins. But Jung discovered the most devastating truth of all. Awakening is not an event. It is a lifestyle of dying. Not once, not twice, but endlessly. Every day, something you thought was true collapses. Every week, another identity is stripped away. Every month, a deeper shadow emerges. Every year, the ego must be humbled again. Awakening does not bring stability. It brings perpetual dismantling. And that is why so few survive. Because the human soul longs for completion, for finality, for rest. But in awakening, there is no end point, only the infinite spiral. Jung himself lived this reality. Even in his 80s, after decades of pioneering psychology, after mapping the unconscious more thoroughly than anyone before him, he dreamed he was only a student again, ignorant, searching, beginning. His unconscious whispered the most humbling truth: you know nothing. After a lifetime of work, after descending into visions that nearly broke him, after discovering the language of archetypes and the vastness of the collective psyche, Jung died not as a master, but as a beginner. Consciousness, he realized, cannot be completed. It is infinite. And how do you complete infinity? One of his patients once asked him, after 7 years of deep analysis, when does it end? When am I healed? Jung's answer destroyed her illusions and liberated her soul in the same breath. Never. The unconscious is infinite. You are exploring eternity. There is no completion. For most, this is unbearable. They want the treasure without the descent, the wisdom without the wound, the resurrection without the crucifixion. But Jung knew that is impossible. This is the paradox at the heart of awakening. You are not climbing to a summit. You are learning to die again and again consciously. And in every death there is a birth. Every ending reveals a beginning. Every dissolution hides a deeper revelation. The ones who survive, Jung saw, are those who fall in love with dying. Not in a morbid sense, but in a conscious sense. They learn to welcome the collapse, to honor the loss, to trust that whatever is being torn away is making room for something more real. They understand that awakening is not improvement, it is revelation, stripping away everything false, until only the raw, unadorned truth remains. And in this endless cycle of dying and becoming, something extraordinary emerges. Jung called it the union of opposites, a state where you no longer cling to light over dark, spirit over matter, consciousness over unconsciousness. Instead, you learn to contain both, the saint and the sinner, the genius and the fool, the god and the animal, all integrated into one paradoxical, authentic self. Not pure, not perfect, but whole. This is the meaning of individuation, not transcending your humanity, but finally inhabiting it completely, to become, as Jung said, who you truly are. And that true self includes everything you thought you were not, every instinct, every contradiction, every fragment you exiled to survive. To be awakened is not to rise above, it is to descend fully into the paradox of being human, and to hold it all consciously without running away. Most cannot do this. They want awakening to make them special, to make them finished, to make them finally safe. But awakening offers none of that. What it offers instead is truth, and truth does not comfort. It strips, it burns, it remakes. You don't survive awakening as who you were. That self cannot make it through. What emerges is something else, not higher, not holier, but more real, more whole, more human. This is why Jung's final message was not about survival at all. It was about surrender. He would tell you, stop trying to survive your spiritual awakening. Let it destroy you. Let the shadow erupt and integrate it. Let the ego panic and humble it. Let the return break you and rebuild differently. Let the deaths come and be reborn not once but forever. Because the privilege of a lifetime is not to ascend beyond yourself. It is to finally become yourself. Entire, impossible, real. And so the question is not, will you survive your awakening? The real question is, will you let it complete its work? Will you allow yourself to die again and again, until only the truth remains? At the end of it all, Jung's message was not comfort, but confrontation. Awakening does not save you, it unmasks you. It does not elevate you into light, it drags you through shadow until you remember every part of yourself you tried to forget. It does not grant you perfection, it gives you paradox, the murderer and the saint, the fool and the genius, the god and the animal, all living within you, all demanding to be seen. And when you finally stop resisting, when you let yourself be destroyed completely, what emerges is not someone better, not someone higher, but someone real. This is individuation, the privilege of a lifetime, to become who you truly are. Not a spiritual persona, not a mask of purity, not a seeker chasing light, but a human being made whole. And that wholeness includes everything, every shadow, every crack, every fragment. You don't transcend humanity, you finally inhabit it. Most people never survive their awakening because they are trying to. They cling to old selves, old maps, old comforts. They want transformation without death, resurrection without crucifixion. They want to awaken while still remaining who they were. Impossible. Jung survived because he understood, you do not survive awakening. You die into it so completely that survival is no longer the point. What emerges doesn't need survival, it needs expression. Your symptoms are not failures. They are the cure. Your breakdown is not madness, it is breakthrough in disguise. Your dissolution is not the end, it is the beginning. But only if you stop fighting. Only if you let it take you all the way down, all the way through, until nothing false remains. And so, the final choice is before you. Not whether you will awaken, the process has already begun. The choice is whether you will surrender to it. Whether you will let yourself be destroyed into wholeness. Whether you will risk everything for the truth. Because as Jung warned, you're not going crazy. You're going sane. The world just calls sanity madness, because it is so deeply asleep. This is EchoVeil, a voice for those walking the night sea journey. for those willing to lose themselves to find themselves, for those who would rather be whole than good. If these words resonate with you, subscribe to EchoVeil. Join others who are walking this same path through shadow and paradox, because none of us can face this descent alone. And if you found something true here, share it. You never know whose life it may touch in their darkest night. So I ask you, not will you survive your awakening, but will you let it finish its work? I realize law as the only way